Angry millionaire CEO stormed into his ex-wife's house. He froze when he saw baby in her arms. The baby's dark eyes locked onto mine. And in that moment, standing in my ex-wife's doorway, soaked from the rain, and shaking with rage, 3 thoughts hit me like a freight train. This child was mine. Belle had hidden her from me for months, and everything I thought I knew about the last 7 months of my life had been a lie. You want to know what I said when I saw her? You want to know what comes out of your mouth when you discover the woman you divorced is holding your daughter that you never knew existed? I'll tell you exactly what I said. How long have you known? Belle just stood there in the doorway, exhausted, transformed, with this tiny human in her arms. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. About the baby, or about you finding out. Don't play games with me, Belle. You know exactly what I'm asking. She was quiet for so long, I thought she might close the door in my face. Then she stepped aside. Come in, Dante. We need to talk. And that's when my whole world shattered. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that their betrayal didn't feel like anger? It felt like your heart was being ripped out while you were still breathing. Drop a comment right now and tell me, would you forgive someone who hid your child from you? Because what happened in that house that night changed everything I thought I knew about love, about forgiveness, and about what it means to be a father. And if you want to see how this story ends, you better hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, this is going to take you on an emotional journey you won't forget. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. Earlier that day, before the rain, before the rage, before I knew that everything was about to change, the kitchen of my flagship restaurant in the French Quarter gleamed under industrial lights. Stainless steel surfaces reflected the organized chaos of dinner service preparation. I stood at the pass, watching my team move with the precision of a ballet company. This was my 3rd Michelin star ceremony. 3 stars. The pinnacle of culinary achievement. The thing I had sacrificed everything to earn. Chef Moreau, Marcus, my sous chef, approached with a bottle of champagne already uncorked. The staff is ready to toast. I nodded, allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. 15 years of 18-hour days. 15 years of perfecting recipes and building an empire across 4 continents. 20 restaurants bearing my name in letters of gold. And now, 3 Michelin stars. The staff gathered around, glasses raised. Marcus cleared his throat. To Chef Dante Moreau, 3 Michelin stars, the best chef in New Orleans. Hell, one of the best in the world. Glasses clinked, champagne flowed. But Marcus's next words, spoken casually as he refilled my glass, would detonate like a bomb in my carefully constructed life. Oh, hey, meant to mention, I saw your ex-wife at Tulane Medical Center yesterday. My sister had surgery, and Dr. Belle was consulting. She looked good, man. Little tired maybe, but good. I kept my expression neutral. Belle and I had been divorced for 7 months. 7 months since she'd signed the papers with that quiet dignity that had always unsettled me. We'd agreed on a clean break. No contact. No reminders of what we'd failed to build together. That's good to hear. I took a sip of champagne, already turning back toward the kitchen. Yeah, crazy thing though, Marcus continued, oblivious to the grenade he was about to throw. She had a baby with her, like a really young baby. And I swear to God, Chef, that kid looked exactly like you. Same dark hair, same intense eyes. I almost asked if she'd remarried, but figured that was too personal, you know. The champagne glass in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. The kitchen sounds became white noise. A baby. Belle with a baby. I did the math instantly. We'd been divorced for 7 months. Our last night together had been 8 months ago. The night before, I'd asked for the divorce. The night I'd been too much of a coward to tell her face to face that I wanted out. So I'd made love to her like everything was fine. The next morning, I'd handed her the papers. My hands started to shake. Chef, you okay? Marcus looked concerned. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine. The words came out mechanical. I need to make a call. I walked out of my own celebration, through the dining room where critics and food writers were already gathering for the evening service. Past the host stand, out into the October afternoon that suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too much. My phone was in my hand. I pulled up Belle's sister's number. Marguerite had never liked me, had made that clear throughout our marriage. But she was fiercely protective of Belle, which meant she'd know the truth. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. Dante. Her voice was cool, professional. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I need to ask you something. I'm in a meeting. Marguerite. My voice came out harder than intended. Does Belle have a baby? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. You need to talk to your ex-wife. So it's true, I didn't say that. You didn't deny it either. How old, Marguerite? How old is the baby? Another pause. 3 weeks. She's 3 weeks old. The world tilted. 3 weeks. Belle had given birth 3 weeks ago, which meant she'd been pregnant when we signed the divorce papers. Pregnant when she'd packed her cameras and moved out of our Tribeca loft. Pregnant through our entire separation. And she never told me. The rage came then, hot and righteous and all-consuming. She'd robbed me of 9 months, of doctor's appointments and ultrasounds and feeling my child move inside her, of being there when our daughter was born. 3 weeks of my child's life, gone, stolen. I have to go. I ended the call before Marguerite could respond. The drive from the French Quarter to the Garden District normally took 20 minutes. I made it in 12. The afternoon had turned gray, clouds rolling in from the Gulf, promising the kind of autumn thunderstorm that turned New Orleans streets into rivers. By the time I reached her house, the rain had started, fat drops that exploded on the windshield and turned the world into a watercolor painting. I didn't bother with an umbrella, didn't care that the Tom Ford suit I'd worn to accept my 3rd Michelin star was getting soaked. The house looked exactly as I remembered. Pale yellow Creole cottage with deep green shutters, flower boxes still thriving despite Belle's impossible schedule at the hospital. Our house. No. Her house now. Had been for 7 months since she'd walked out of my life with the same quiet dignity she'd brought to our 5-year marriage. I shoved open the wrought iron gate. It squealed in protest, the sound cutting through the rain. My footsteps echoed on the brick walkway. Everything in me was focused on one thing: getting answers, getting the truth, understanding how the woman I'd shared a bed with for 5 years could hide something this massive from me. My fist connected with the door 3 times. Hard, deliberate knocks that matched the thunderous beating of my heart. The door opened. And time stopped. Belle stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the foyer. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She'd always been beautiful. Honey brown skin that glowed like she carried sunshine under her surface. Dark eyes that had once looked at me like I hung the moon over Lake Pontchartrain. But the woman standing before me was different, transformed. She was thinner, cheekbones more pronounced beneath skin that had lost some of its luminosity. Exhaustion carved shadows under her eyes. Her black hair, usually pulled back in the sleek bun she wore in the operating room, fell in messy waves around her shoulders. She wore an oversized Saints t-shirt and yoga pants. Her feet were bare despite the October chill. But none of that was what stopped me cold. In her arms, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, was a baby. A tiny baby with a cap of dark curls and skin the color of warm honey. The baby was making soft sounds, little grunts and squeaks that I'd later learn meant she was waking up from a nap. Dante. Belle's voice carried no surprise, as if she'd been expecting this moment, dreading it, preparing for it. We need to talk. She stepped aside without a word. I walked into the house that had once been ours, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floors we'd refinished together. The interior smelled different. Gone was the subtle scent of her Chanel perfume, the one I'd bought her in Paris. Now the air carried the clean, powdery smell of baby products mixed with the chicory coffee she'd always loved. The living room had been completely transformed. Where our sleek modern furniture had once stood, there was now a comfortable navy sofa draped with soft blankets. A wooden rocking chair I'd never seen before sat in the corner where her reading nook used to be. And next to the rocking chair, a white bassinet with delicate mesh sides. my eyes fixed on that bassinet like it held the answers to questions I was terrified to ask. "She's sleeping," Belle said quietly, following my gaze. Finally, she fought her evening nap for 2 hours. A daughter. I had a daughter. How long? The words scraped out of my throat. How long have you known? Belle moved to the sofa, settling into the corner with the baby against her shoulder. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond simple tiredness. This was the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been carrying too much alone for too long. About the baby? Or about you finding out? The repeated question from the doorway. The same careful deflection. My anger, which had softened slightly at the sight of her, came roaring back. "Don't," I cut her off, my voice harder than I intended. "Don't play games with me, Belle. You know exactly what I'm asking." She was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in gentle circles on the baby's back. The motion looked automatic, practiced, something she'd done 1,000 times while I was living my life completely unaware. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but soft. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you asked for the divorce. The papers were already drawn up. You'd made it clear what you wanted. And you decided to just not tell me. I decided to survive." The words came out with surprising firmness. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. A kind of fierce protectiveness that went beyond anything we'd shared in our marriage. Survive? I heard my voice rising and forced myself to lower it. The baby stirred at the sound. "You call hiding my child from me for 8 months surviving? You told me children didn't fit into your schedule, Dante." She adjusted the baby slightly, her movements so natural it made my chest ache. "You made that abundantly clear." I had said that 6 months before the divorce, during one of our rare dinners together. Her between surgical rotations, me between flights to Singapore and Sao Paulo. She'd mentioned wanting to start trying for a baby, and I'd shut it down with the casual cruelty of someone who thought they had all the time in the world. "Children are a 20-year commitment, Belle," I'd said, cutting into my steak like we were discussing a business merger. "We're both at crucial points in our careers. You're about to be named head of trauma surgery. I'm expanding into 3 new markets. A baby would derail everything." She hadn't brought it up again. 2 months later, I'd asked for the divorce. "That's not the point," I began, but my voice lacked conviction. "This isn't about schedules or timing. This is about honesty, about giving me a choice." "What choice?" Belle's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. "The choice to feel obligated, to resent us both, to fit us into your calendar between board meetings and restaurant openings. You don't get to make those decisions for me." My voice echoed in the quiet apartment. From the bundle in Belle's arms came a small, startled cry. The baby's face scrunched up, turning red, and suddenly the soft sounds became full-fledged wailing. Belle was on her feet instantly, moving with fluid grace toward the sound. The transformation was immediate. Her whole body shifted, every movement focused on soothing the crying infant. "Shh, baby girl. Mama's here." "It's okay, sweetheart." I watched, frozen, as she swayed gently. The baby's cries softened at the sound of her mother's voice, but didn't stop completely. Belle turned slightly, and I caught my first clear glimpse of my daughter's face. The world stopped spinning. The baby had my eyes, not just the color, though they were dark like mine, but the shape, the way they seemed to take in everything with serious intensity, even through tears. Her hair was dark, almost black, with the same slight wave I'd inherited from my Portuguese grandfather. Even the shape of her tiny nose, the set of her mouth, carried an unmistakable resemblance. "Jesus Christ," I breathed, sinking into the armchair across from the couch. Belle was still swaying, still murmuring soft reassurances. The baby's cries had reduced to hiccuping sobs. After a moment, Belle looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since I'd walked through her door. "Her name is Amélie," she said softly. "Amélie Rose. She's 19 days old. Amélie." The name felt foreign on my tongue, but somehow right. French, like my mother's family. Rose, like the wild roses that grew along Belle's grandmother's property in Lafayette. Why that name? It means hard-working and industrious, Belle looked down at the baby with a tenderness that made my chest ache. I needed to believe she'd inherit strength, that she'd be resilient enough to handle whatever life threw at her. The implication was clear, that she'd need strength because her father wasn't going to be there, because Belle had planned from the beginning to do this alone. The baby, Amelie, had calmed down completely. Her eyes were open now, dark and alert, studying the ceiling with the kind of focus that made her look wise beyond her 19 days. "Can I?" I stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Can I hold her?" Belle studied my face for a long moment. I saw a war playing out in her expression, the desire to protect her daughter versus something else, something that might have been hope, or maybe just exhaustion. He just ate. She should be calm for a while. Belle moved closer, and I caught the faint scent of her lavender shampoo, still the same one she'd used throughout our marriage. Support her head. She's stronger than she looks, but still fragile. I reached out with hands that had crafted 1,000 perfect dishes, hands that could fillet a fish with surgical precision, hands that had never trembled, even during my first dinner service at Le Bernardin. Now those hands shook as Belle carefully transferred our daughter into my arms. Amelie was so much smaller than I'd expected, so warm, so solid, so undeniably real. I'd held my nieces when they were babies, but this was different. This tiny person carried half my DNA. This was my daughter. She looked up at me with solemn dark eyes, and something fundamental cracked open inside my chest, something I'd kept locked away since my own father's funeral a decade ago. "Hello, Amelie," I whispered, my voice rough with emotion I hadn't given myself permission to feel. "I'm your papa." The words felt inadequate. How do you introduce yourself to someone you should have known from the moment of conception? How do you apologize to a 19-day-old baby for missing the first weeks of her life? Belle watched from a careful distance, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold, or maybe protecting herself from whatever was happening between me and Amelie. "I know you're angry," she said quietly, "and you have every right to be, but please understand, I was protecting her. And myself." I looked up from Amelie's face to meet Belle's eyes. For the first time since walking through her door, I saw her not as the woman who had deceived me, but as the mother who had carried this child alone, who had made impossible choices with no good options. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely audible over Amelie's soft breathing. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" Belle's composure finally cracked. Tears she'd been holding back began to spill over, cutting tracks down her cheeks. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. I kept telling myself I'd figure it out later, when I was stronger, when I could handle your reaction. But then days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and the longer I waited, the harder it became. Amelie made a small sound, drawing both our attention back to her. Her tiny hand had worked free of the blanket and was grasping at the air. Without thinking, I offered my finger. Her grip closed around it with surprising strength. In that moment, holding my daughter for the first time while the woman I'd once loved more than my own ambition cried quietly across the room, I understood that everything I thought I knew about my life, about myself, about what mattered, was about to change forever. "Belle," I said, and she looked at me through her tears. "Tell me everything." "The beginning. How did you find out? When did you know? What was it like, going through this alone?" She sank back onto the couch, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. "I took the test in a hospital bathroom. 3 weeks after you asked for the divorce. I'd been feeling off for days, but I thought it was just stress. The divorce, moving out, trying to figure out how to live alone after 5 years of marriage." She paused, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. 2 pink lines. That's all it took to change everything. I sat on that bathroom floor for 20 minutes, just staring at the test, trying to figure out what to do. "What did you want to do?" At first, Belle laughed, but it was bitter. "I wanted to call you." I picked up my phone 3 times, started typing messages I never sent, wrote emails I deleted. I kept thinking, maybe this would change things. Maybe you'd want to try again. Maybe a baby would make you remember why we got married in the first place. But you didn't call. No. Because then I remembered what you'd said that night at dinner, that children didn't fit your schedule, that you couldn't imagine anything worse than being tied to someone forever because of a child. I closed my eyes, shame washing over me. I'd said those exact words. Worse, I'd meant them at the time. And then, Belle continued, her voice getting stronger, then I remembered the night you asked for the divorce. Do you remember what you said? Which part? The part where you said you'd dodged a bullet. That at least we hadn't made the mistake of having children together before we figured out we weren't compatible. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. I had said that, standing in our kitchen, watching her read through the divorce papers with that quiet dignity that made me feel like a monster, trying to convince myself I was doing the right thing, trying to convince her that ending our marriage was best for both of us. I was already pregnant when you said that. Belle's voice was barely above a whisper. About 4 weeks along, though I didn't know it yet. I found out 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized, but when I did find out, all I could hear was your voice saying you couldn't to imagine anything worse than being tied to me because of a child. Amelie stirred in my arms, and I automatically began the gentle bouncing motion I'd watched Belle do. The movement came instinctively, as if my body knew what to do, even though my brain was still catching up. So you decided not to tell me. I decided to protect Amelie from being seen as a mistake, from having a father who felt trapped by her existence. Belle stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain that was still coming down in sheets. I know it wasn't fair to you. I know I took away your choice, but I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at her the way you looked at me that night, like we were obstacles to your real life. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we'd never said. Everything we'd been too hurt or too proud to acknowledge. Amelie's breathing provided a soft counterpoint to the rain hammering against the windows. I would have changed my mind, I said finally. If you'd told me, I would have figured it out. Belle turned to look at me, and the skepticism in her eyes cut deeper than any words. Would you? Or would you have done the right thing out of obligation and resented us both? It was a fair question, and we both knew it. The man I'd been 8 months ago probably would have done exactly that, stepped up out of duty while viewing fatherhood as another responsibility to manage rather than a gift to embrace. I don't know, I admitted, looking down at Amelie. I'd like to think I would have risen to the occasion, but honestly, you're probably right. I probably would have seen her as a complication to solve rather than a person to love. And now, I looked at my daughter, who was sleeping with the complete trust that only babies possessed. One tiny hand was curled around my finger, and her dark eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks in the soft light. Now I can't imagine my life without her, without either of you. Belle's expression softened slightly, but wariness remained. Dante, you've known about her for less than an hour. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not promising anything except to be here, to learn, to do whatever it takes to be the father she deserves. Amelie chose that moment to wake up fully, her face scrunching as she began to fuss again. Belle moved toward me immediately, her hands already reaching. She's hungry. It's been almost 3 hours since her last feeding. Show me how, I said. What? Show me how to feed her, how to do whatever she needs. If I'm going to be here, I need to learn. Belle hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay, come to the kitchen. I'll show you how to prepare a bottle. I stood carefully, cradling Amelie against my chest. She was crying in earnest now, her face red with infant outrage. Belle led me to the kitchen, moving with the efficient purpose of someone who'd done this routine hundreds of times. The kitchen looked different too. Where we'd once had a wine rack, there was now a bottle sterilizer. The counter where I used to spread out my recipe notes was covered with burp cloths and a diaper-changing mat. Formula is in the cabinet on the right. Belle was already pulling out supplies. Bottles are in the sterilizer. We use filtered water, heated to exactly 98 degrees. She walked me through each step, measuring the formula with precise scoops, adding water at the right temperature, shaking until the mixture was smooth, testing a drop on the inside of my wrist to make sure it wasn't too hot. Now, sit. She gestured to the rocking chair. Support her head in the crook of your arm. Let her guide the pace. Don't force the bottle. She'll let you know if it's too fast or too slow. I settled into the chair, adjusting Amelie until she was positioned the way Belle had shown me. The moment the bottle touched her lips, she latched on with fierce determination. Her crying stopped instantly, replaced by the soft sounds of drinking. Belle stood nearby, watching with the intensity of a surgeon supervising a complex procedure. "You're a natural," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. "I'm terrified I'm going to do something wrong. That's called being a parent. Welcome to the club." For the next 20 minutes, we existed in a bubble of domesticity. Me feeding Amelie, Belle cleaning up the kitchen and preparing for the next feeding, the rain outside creating a cocoon of sound that made the rest of the world feel very far away. When Amelie finished the bottle, Belle showed me how to burp her, how to hold her upright against my shoulder and pat gently until she released a burp that seemed impossibly large for such a tiny person. "Good girl," Belle said, smiling for the first time since I'd arrived. "That's my girl. Our girl," I corrected gently. Belle's smile faded. "Dante, we can't just snap our fingers and become a family. It's not that simple." "I know, but she's mine, Belle. You can't ask me to walk away now that I know. I'm not asking you to walk away, but I need you to understand what you're committing to. This isn't babysitting for a few hours until the novelty wears off. This is 3 a.m. feedings and blowout diapers and crying that goes on for hours for no reason you can identify. This is putting her needs before everything else. Every single time. Then teach me." I met her eyes. "Let me be here. Let me learn how to be her father." Belle was quiet for so long I thought she might refuse. Then she sighed, the sound carrying the weight of every sleepless night and every moment she'd faced alone. "Okay. You can come back tomorrow. But Dante," her voice hardened, "if you're going to be in her life, you're all in or you're not in at all. I won't have Amelie wondering why Daddy only shows up when it's convenient. I won't let her feel like an obligation you fit in between board meetings. I understand. Do you? Because your phone has been buzzing in your pocket for the last 30 minutes, and I can see you fighting the urge to check it." She was right. My phone had been vibrating almost constantly. Probably my managers wondering where I disappeared to. Probably investors wanting to celebrate the Michelin star. Probably a dozen things that used to seem critically important. I pulled out my phone and powered it off completely. Then I set it on the kitchen counter. "Tomorrow," I said. "What time should I be here?" "Amelie usually wakes up around 6 a.m. If you're serious about learning, that's when the day starts." "I'll be here at 6. Belle studied my face, looking for something. Doubt, maybe, or insincerity. Whatever she was searching for, she must not have found it, because she nodded. "Okay." 6 a.m. I stood, reluctantly transferring Amelie back to Belle's arms. The baby had fallen asleep again, her face peaceful and perfect. Leaving felt like tearing off a limb. "Belle." I stopped at the door. "Thank you for letting me in, for giving me a chance to know her. She's your daughter, Dante. You have a right to know her, but you could have kept this from me longer. You could have refused to let me see her tonight. Thank you for not doing that." Something shifted in Belle's expression. The walls she'd built didn't come down, but maybe they cracked just a little. "See you tomorrow." I drove back to my French Quarter penthouse through rain that had softened to a steady drizzle. The city lights blurred through my windshield, turning familiar streets into an abstract painting. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. I had a daughter, Amelie Rose, 19 days old, and I'd missed every single one of those days. The penthouse felt cavernous and sterile after the warm chaos of Belle's place. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Mississippi River, the view I'd paid a premium for. The silence was oppressive. I'd always prized quiet, had specifically chosen this building for its soundproofing. But now, it felt like a tomb. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey and stood at the window, watching the city pulse with life 40 stories below. Somewhere in that maze of lights, Belle was probably struggling with a late-night feeding, exhausted and alone, while our daughter demanded everything she had to give. My phone powered back on automatically, and notifications flooded in. 73 missed calls, 42 text messages, 27 emails marked urgent. I scrolled through them mechanically, My restaurant manager wanting to know where I'd disappeared to. Food critics waiting for interviews. My publicist asking about the speech I was supposed to give at tomorrow's industry luncheon. None of it mattered. I opened a new text to my assistant, copying my entire executive team. Cancel everything on my calendar for the next 2 weeks. Postpone the Tokyo trip indefinitely. I have a family emergency that requires my full attention. The responses came within minutes. Confusion, concern, barely concealed panic about deals that would fall through and investors who would be angry. I turned the phone off again and went to bed, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amelie's face. Those serious dark eyes looking up at me with complete trust. Her tiny hand wrapped around my finger with surprising strength. At 5:30 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I showered, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt instead of my usual suit, and drove to the bakery Belle had always loved. The one in the Marigny that made fresh baguettes starting at 4 a.m. I arrived at Belle's door at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying 2 large coffee cups and a bag of fresh pastries. Belle answered on the second knock, looking like she'd been awake for hours, which, I'd later learn, she had been. She wore the same oversized Saints t-shirt from yesterday, but with different yoga pants. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, but when she saw the coffee, she smiled, really smiled. You remembered my order. Oat milk latte, extra shot, no sugar. Some things don't change. She accepted the cup with both hands like it was a lifeline. Come in. Amelie's awake. She's been fussy since 4 a.m. So I hope you're ready for baptism by fire. The next 6 hours were the most exhausting, terrifying, and strangely fulfilling of my life. Belle taught me how to change diapers, which was significantly more complicated than I'd anticipated. How to read Amelie's different cries. The hungry cry versus the tired cry versus the I just want to be held cry. How to support her neck during changes. How to fasten the tiny diaper tabs without making them too tight or too loose. You're overthinking it, Belle observed, watching me struggle with Amelie's outfit for the 3rd time. She's not a souffle that'll collapse if you breathe wrong. She's so small. I finally managed to get Amelie's arms through the sleeves of a soft blue onesie. What if I hurt her? You won't. Belle's voice was gentler than I'd heard it since before the divorce. Babies are tougher than they look. She's not going to break. Amelie began to fuss again, her face scrunching in the way I was learning meant she was building up to a real cry. Belle moved to take her, but I held up a hand. Let me try. I lifted Amelie carefully, remembering how Belle had shown me to support the head, and began the swaying motion I'd watched her do. Amelie's cries softened to hiccups, then to silence as she settled against my chest. She likes you, Belle said. And there was something in her voice, surprise maybe, or cautious hope, or she's just tired of your singing. That earned me a genuine laugh, the first real one I'd heard from her since before our divorce. The sound hit me with unexpected force, reminding me of all the reasons I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. My phone started buzzing. Then began a steady stream of notifications that made Belle raise an eyebrow. I started to reach for it, then stopped. Actually, no, whatever it is, can wait. Dante Moreau, ignoring his phone. I never thought I'd see the day. Yeah, well. I looked down at Amelie, who was sleeping peacefully against my chest. Things change. The phone continued buzzing insistently. Belle glanced at it, then at me. You can check it. I know how important your work is, not more important than this. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with everything we'd never been able to say during our marriage. Belle looked away first, but not before I caught something vulnerable in her expression. I stayed until early afternoon, learning the rhythms of Amelie's day. The way she liked to be held after feeding, the specific angle of the bottle that prevented gas, the soft spot on her head that Belle warned me to be careful of, the 1,000 tiny details that made up caring for a newborn. When I finally left, promising to return the next morning, I felt like I'd run a marathon, but also like I'd accomplished something more important than any Michelin star. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. I'd arrive at 6 a.m. with coffee and breakfast. Belle would teach me something new. I'd hold Amelie and marvel at how quickly I was falling in love with this tiny person I barely knew. And every time my phone buzzed with urgent messages from my restaurant empire, I'd silence it and turn back to my daughter. On the fourth morning, Belle was different, more tense. When I arrived with the usual coffee, she was pacing the living room with Amelie, both of them looking frazzled. Bad night. Belle laughed, but it sounded exhausted. She was up every hour. I got maybe 90 minutes of sleep total. I'm starting to forget what it feels like to be rested. Let me take her. Go sleep. I'll handle whatever she needs. Dante, you don't have to. I know, but I want to. Please, Belle. You look like you're about to collapse. She hesitated, then handed Amelie over. The baby was fussy, making the frustrated sounds that I'd learned meant she was overtired, but fighting sleep. There's a bottle in the fridge if she gets hungry. Belle was already moving toward the bedroom. And if she won't settle, there's a white noise app on my phone that sometimes helps. I've got this. Go sleep. Belle disappeared into the bedroom, and I heard the door close. Amelie chose that moment to ramp up to a full cry, her face turning red with infant outrage. Okay, little one. I started the swaying motion that usually worked. Let's figure this out together. The next 2 hours were a crash course in infant care under pressure. I tried feeding, didn't want it, changed her diaper. That helped for about 5 minutes. Walked laps around the apartment while humming French lullabies my grandmother used to sing. That worked until I stopped. Finally, in desperation, I found Belle's phone and pulled up the white noise app. The sound of rain filled the room, and Amelie's cries immediately softened. I kept swaying, kept the white noise playing, and gradually, finally, she settled into sleep against my chest. I sank into the rocking chair, afraid to move and wake her. My arms were tired, my back was sore. I was pretty sure I had spit up on my shoulder. And I'd never felt more accomplished. That's how Belle found us 3 hours later. Me in the rocking chair, Amelie sleeping on my chest, both of us knocked out cold. She told me later that she'd stood in the doorway for a full 5 minutes, just watching us, trying to reconcile. The man who'd asked for a divorce with the man who'd spent his morning soothing his daughter to sleep. When I woke up, Belle was sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. What time is it? Almost noon. She smiled. You both looked so peaceful. I didn't want to wake you. I'm sorry. I should have. Don't apologize. That's the best sleep I've had in 3 weeks. Amelie stirred, making soft sounds as she woke. Belle moved to take her, and I reluctantly let her go. Thank you, Belle said quietly, for this morning, for letting me rest. You don't have to thank me. She's my daughter. I know. But you could have left when things got hard, when she wouldn't stop crying. A lot of people would have. I'm not a lot of people. And I told you, Belle, I'm not going anywhere. Something shifted in her expression. The wall she'd been maintaining cracked just a little more. My sister's coming tomorrow. Marguerite. She's flying in from Houston. I know who Marguerite is. I tried to keep my voice neutral. Your protective older sister who never thought I was good enough for you. She doesn't know about you being back in the picture. What does she know? Everything about the pregnancy and Amelie. Nothing about you finding out. Belle adjusted Amelie slightly. She's been my main support through all of this. She took time off work to be here when I was in my 3rd trimester. She's planning to stay for a week. The implication was clear. Marguerite had been there for Belle when I hadn't been. Marguerite had earned her place in this new family structure. When does she arrive? Tomorrow afternoon. Her flight gets in around 3. I should probably leave before she gets here. Make this easier. No. Belle met my eyes. You should be here. If we're doing this, if you're really going to be part of Amelie's life, then Marguerite needs to see that. She needs to know you're serious, even though she's going to hate it, especially because she's going to hate it. If you can handle Marguerite's interrogation, you can handle anything. The next afternoon, I showed up at Belle's house at 2:30, half an hour before Marguerite's scheduled arrival. Belle opened the door holding Amelie, who was wide awake and alert. You're early. Thought I should be here when she arrives. Show I'm not hiding. Brave choice. Belle stepped aside to let me in. or possibly stupid. I haven't decided yet. Marguerite's rental car pulled up at exactly 3 o'clock. I watched through the window as she got out, pulling a sleek leather weekender from the trunk. She looked exactly as I remembered. Tall, polished, intimidating. Her honey blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Designer suit even for a casual flight. The kind of woman who commanded respect in boardrooms filled with men twice her age. She stopped short when she entered the living room and saw me sitting on the couch, holding Amelie. Well, well. Marguerite set down her bag with deliberate control. This is unexpected. Marguerite. I stood carefully, mindful of the sleeping baby in my arms. It's good to see you. Is it? Her blue eyes assessed me with the same intensity she probably used to evaluate hostile witnesses. Because the last time we spoke, you were explaining why marriage was a failed partnership that had run its course. Amelie stirred at the sound of raised voices, and I automatically began the gentle bouncing motion that usually soothed her. The gesture wasn't lost on Marguerite, whose expression shifted slightly from outright hostility to cautious curiosity. She's beautiful, Marguerite said, her voice softening despite herself. She looks just like you. She has Belle's mouth, her chin. Viv. Belle crossed to her sister, embracing her carefully to avoid disturbing Amelie. I'm so glad you're here. Of course I'm here. Marguerite returned the hug, but her eyes never left me. Though apparently there have been some developments you failed to mention in our phone calls. It's complicated. I'm sure it is. Marguerite removed her jacket, revealing a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Why don't you start with how long this has been going on? 5 days. I answered before Belle could speak. I found out about Amelie 5 days ago. Marguerite's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. You didn't know? For 3 weeks, you didn't know you had a daughter? 8 months. I didn't know. Belle was already pregnant when we signed the divorce papers. The silence that followed was deafening. Marguerite looked from me to Belle, her lawyer's mind clearly racing through the implications. Carolina Isabel Hayes, she said finally, using Belle's legal name, the full name that meant serious trouble. Are you telling me you've been doing this alone for 3 weeks while your child's father was completely unaware of her existence? It wasn't that simple. It sounds exactly that simple. You had his baby and didn't tell him. Marguerite's voice carried the kind of courtroom authority that made opposing counsel nervous. I was thinking about protecting my daughter, Belle said, her own temper beginning to flare. And myself. By lying? By surviving. Amelie began to fuss, picking up on the tension in the room. I bounced her gently, making soft shushing sounds that seemed to work better than they had any right to. He's good with her, Marguerite observed almost reluctantly. He's learning, Belle said, moving to take Amelie from my arms as the baby's fussing escalated toward real crying. We both are. Marguerite watched her sisters settle into the familiar routine, checking the diaper, offering food, finding the right position for comfort. And what exactly is this? She asked, gesturing between Belle and me. Are you back together? CO parenting? What's the arrangement? We don't have an arrangement, I said. We're figuring it out as we go. That's not an answer. It's the only answer we have right now. Marguerite studied me with the same intensity she probably brought to cross-examinations. You know, I spent most of Belle's marriage waiting for you to break her heart. When you finally did, I was almost relieved. At least the waiting was over. Viv. Belle started. No, let me finish. Marguerite held up a hand. I watched her make herself smaller to fit into your life, Dante. I watched her give up photography assignments because they conflicted with your schedule. I watched her stop talking about the things she wanted because you'd made it clear they weren't priorities. Each word was a precisely aimed arrow, and I felt them hit their marks. You're right. I said simply, am I? Because if I'm right, then what are you doing here now? What's different? I looked at Amelie, now content in Belle's arms, then at Belle herself, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Everything is different. That's not enough. Marguerite's voice was sharp. Different how? Different why? What happens when your board of directors decides they need you in Tokyo for 6 weeks? What happens when Amelie gets sick in the middle of your biggest deal of the year? The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one highlighting the uncertainty that had been gnawing at me since that first night. I don't know, I admitted. I wish I could give you guarantees, but I can't. All I can tell you is that I want to be here. I want to learn how to be the father Amelie deserves. Want isn't enough, Marguerite said. Belle wanted you to prioritize your marriage. That didn't work out so well. The words stung because they were true. I had failed Belle during our marriage. I had chosen my career over her needs, my ambition over our relationship. Why should anyone believe this time would be different? You're right, I met Marguerite's challenging gaze. I failed Belle. I was a terrible husband who put everything else before our marriage. I have no track record of following through when things get difficult. And you have every reason to believe I'll do the same thing again. Damn right I do. But here's what's different. I looked at Amelie, sleeping peacefully now. I didn't know what I was missing before. I could convince myself that work was more important than dinner with my wife, that a deal in Singapore mattered more than being home for our anniversary. But I can't unknow my daughter. I can't unsee what I saw when I held her for the first time. And I can't go back to a life where she doesn't exist. Pretty words, Marguerite said, but words are easy. Actions are what matter. Then, let me show you. Let me prove that I'm serious. How? By hanging around for a week until the novelty wears off? By being here, every day, learning, helping, putting her first even when it's inconvenient. We'll see. Marguerite's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I'm glad Belle has someone looking out for her interests now. She's always needed someone in her corner. She has you. And now she has me watching you, to make sure you don't break her heart again. Despite the tension, I found myself almost smiling. I'd forgotten how Marguerite's fierce protectiveness had occasionally amused me during the marriage, even when it was directed at my shortcomings. Fair enough. Belle cleared her throat. Now that we've established Viv is going to be monitoring Dante's every move, can we maybe have lunch? I ordered from that Thai place you like. The rest of the afternoon passed in cautious détente. Marguerite grilled me about my plans, my business, my intentions. I answered honestly, admitting I didn't have everything figured out, that I was making it up as I went, that I was terrified of failing again but more terrified of not trying. By the time I left that evening, Marguerite hadn't exactly given me her blessing, but she also hadn't thrown me out. In the hierarchy of Marguerite's approval, that counted as progress. Over the next week, I fell into a rhythm with Belle and Amelie. I'd arrive early, usually before Amelie's first feeding of the day. I'd help with the morning routine. Then I'd spend the day learning, watching, slowly becoming more confident in my ability to care for my daughter. My phone continued to explode with messages from my restaurant group. The board was getting impatient. Deals were falling through. Staff was threatening to quit. My empire was starting to crack at the foundations. And for the first time in my 15-year career, I didn't care. On day 8, everything came to a head. I was sitting on Belle's floor, attempting to assemble a bouncer seat that had arrived that morning when my phone rang for the 15th time in an hour. I'd been ignoring the calls, but this one was from Robert, my head of operations. The man never called unless there was a genuine emergency. I have to take this, I told Belle, who was feeding Amelie on the couch. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Lockwood, I answered, stepping into the hallway. Silas, thank God. Robert's voice was tight with stress. We have a serious problem. The Yamamoto deal is collapsing. What happened? They're saying our lack of commitment to the timeline demonstrates fundamental incompatibility with their business philosophy. Robert paused. They want you in Tokyo next week to personally negotiate the terms, or they're walking permanently. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of competing obligations settle on my shoulders. Through the thin walls, I could hear Amelie making soft sounds and Belle's gentle voice responding. Send the team. Jonathan can handle the negotiations. Silas, They specifically requested you. It's about respect, about showing that this partnership matters enough for the CEO to be physically present. How long? Minimum 10 days. Possibly 12 if we want to salvage the subsidiary agreements. 10 to 12 days. Amelie was barely 4 weeks old. Belle was still exhausted, still learning, still struggling with the overwhelming reality of new motherhood. And I was being asked to disappear to the other side of the world for nearly 2 weeks. I'll call you back in an hour. I ended the call before Robert could protest. When I returned to the living room, Belle was standing at the window, bouncing. Amelie, with increasingly desperate movements, while the baby wailed inconsolably. "He won't eat," Belle said without turning around. "She's been crying for 20 minutes, and nothing I do helps." I approached carefully, noting the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her voice carried an edge of panic she was trying to control. "Let me try." She handed Amelie over with hands that trembled slightly. The baby's cries didn't stop immediately, but they softened as I settled her against my chest and began the slow, rhythmic swaying that had become second nature. "You have the magic touch," Belle said, but there was no humor in it. "She always calms down for you. It's not magic. She just knows you're stressed." "I'm not stressed. I'm fine, Carolina." She finally turned to face me, and I saw the exhaustion that went beyond simple tiredness. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her complexion pale, and there was a brittleness to her smile that made my chest ache. "Okay, I'm a little stressed. It's normal. All new mothers go through this. When's the last time you left this apartment?" She blinked, clearly trying to remember. "We went to the pediatrician last Thursday. That's 5 days ago. Belle, you need air. Sunlight. Time away from being responsible for another human being every second of every day. I can't leave her." "What if something happens? What if she needs me? She needs you healthy and rested more than she needs you hovering." Amelie had finally quieted in my arms, her dark eyes drooping toward sleep. Belle watched us with an expression that was part relief, part resentment. "Your phone's been buzzing non-stop," she observed, changing the subject. "Emergency?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Work stuff. Nothing that can't wait. Dante." Her voice held a warning. "Don't lie to me. Not about work." I looked at Amelie, now sleeping peacefully despite the chaos of the morning. Then at Belle, who was watching me with the careful attention she'd always paid to my moods when business pressures mounted. "Yamamoto is pulling out of the deal. They want me in Tokyo next week." "For how long?" 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Belle's face went through a series of micro-expressions: disappointment, anger, resignation, and finally, a kind of bitter understanding. "Of course they do. I'm not going." "Yes, you are." "Belle, don't." She held up a hand, stopping me. "Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't pretend this is a choice when we both know it isn't. It is a choice. I'm choosing to stay." She laughed, but it was hollow. "For what? So you can resent us when your company loses millions? So you can blame Amelie for derailing your career? So you can spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd put business first like you always do? That's not fair, isn't it?" She moved to the coffee maker, her movements sharp and efficient. Viv asked what happens when being a father conflicts with being a CEO. "Congratulations, Dante. We're about to find out." Amelie stirred in my arms, responding to the tension in the room. I bounced her gently, but my mind was racing through alternatives, contingencies, ways to be in 2 places at once. There has to be another solution. There is. You go to Tokyo, handle your business, and come back. I'll manage Amelie while you're gone. You shouldn't have to manage alone. I've been managing alone for a month. I can manage for 2 more weeks. But even as she said it, I could see the cracks in her composure, the way her hands shook slightly as she measured coffee, the brittleness in her voice, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much responsibility carried without support. "What if I brought you with me?" Belle paused in her coffee preparation. "To Tokyo? Why not? Amelie's young enough that the travel wouldn't hurt her, and you could use a change of scenery. Dante, I can barely handle her in my own apartment with all my supplies and familiar surroundings. You want me to manage a newborn in a foreign country while you're in meetings 14 hours a day? She was right, and we both knew it. The idea had been desperate, unrealistic, born from my need to believe there was a solution that didn't require choosing between my daughter and my livelihood. My phone rang again. Robert's name flashed on the screen. "Answer it," Belle said quietly. "Handle your crisis." "I'll be fine." But as I looked at her, standing in her kitchen in wrinkled pajamas, holding herself together through sheer force of will while our daughter slept in my arms, I knew that fine was a luxury none of us could afford right now. "Lockwood." I answered the phone, never taking my eyes off Belle's face. "Silas, we need an answer. Yamamoto's giving us until noon to confirm your travel plans or they're walking permanently. Tell them I'll be there Sunday." Belle's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, but she didn't look surprised. She'd been expecting this outcome since the moment my phone started ringing. "Excellent. I'll have Melissa arrange flights and accommodations." "No." I shifted Amelie to one arm, reaching for Belle's hand with the other. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "I'll handle my own arrangements. And Robert, this is the last time. After Tokyo, I want a new protocol for international travel. No more than 5 days away. No more than once per quarter." "Silas, that's not realistic, given our expansion goals." "Then change the expansion goals. The protocol is non-negotiable." I hung up before Robert could argue. But the damage was already done. Belle had pulled her hand free and was staring out the window at the autumn morning, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. 2 weeks, she said without turning around. 10 to 12 days, I corrected. "And then you come home." She turned to face me then. "Is this home?" The question hung between us, deceptively simple but loaded with everything we hadn't defined, everything we were still afraid to name. "Yeah," I said, looking around the apartment that had once been ours, that was slowly becoming ours again in ways neither of us had anticipated. "I think it is." Belle's eyes filled with tears she was trying not to let fall. "Then why does it feel like you're already gone?" I spent the next 3 days trying to prepare Belle for my absence. I hired Margaret Riley, a postpartum doula that Robert's assistant had found through a placement agency in Chicago. I stocked the apartment with enough formula and diapers to last a month. I prepaid for a grocery delivery service and arranged for a cleaning service to come twice a week. But no amount of preparation could fix the fundamental problem. I was leaving, and Belle was facing 2 weeks alone with a newborn after just getting used to having help. The morning I left for the airport, Amelie was crying, Belle was crying, and I was standing in the doorway with my suitcase, feeling like the worst person in the world. "I'll call you every day," I promised, multiple times. "Whenever you need me, just go." Belle's voice was flat. "You're going to miss your flight." "Belle, please, Dante, just go. This is already hard enough without dragging it out." I left, but every mile between New Orleans and Tokyo felt like a betrayal. The negotiations were brutal. Yamamoto's team treated every concession like a hostage negotiation. 3-hour discussions for simple terms. Approval chains that went back to Tokyo headquarters. By day 3, I was ready to walk away from the entire deal. But every time I considered it, I'd think about the board's reaction, the investors who'd been promised this expansion, the staff who'd been working toward this deal for 18 months, the ripple effects of failure that would touch hundreds of people's livelihoods. So I stayed and negotiated and tried not to think about what I was missing at home. The first call from Belle came at 3:47 a.m. New York time, which meant it was 5:40 to 7 p.m. in Tokyo. I was in the middle of a dinner meeting with Yamamoto's executives when my phone buzzed. "I'm sorry." I stood abruptly. "I have to take this. Family emergency." The executives looked annoyed, but I was already walking out of the private dining room. "I'm sorry." Belle's voice was thick with sleep and worry. "I know it's late there. I needed to hear your voice." I could hear Amelie crying in the background, that particular pitch that meant she was building toward a full meltdown. "What's wrong? Is she okay?" "She's fine. She's just..." Belle's voice cracked. "She seems to know you're gone, Dante." She's been fussy all day, and I can't seem to settle her. Have you tried the white noise app? Yes, and the swaddle, and walking her around the apartment for the last 2 hours. Nothing's working. Through the phone, I could hear Belle's exhaustion, her frustration, her barely contained panic, and I was 7,000 miles away, completely useless. Sing to her, I said. That Portuguese lullaby my grandmother used to sing, the one I told you about. I don't remember all the words. You don't need all the words, just the melody. She responds to your voice, Belle. She just needs to know you're there. There was a pause, and then, barely audible through the phone, I heard Belle begin to sing. Dorme menina. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but the melody was hauntingly beautiful in her voice. Amelie's cries gradually faded to soft hiccups, then to silence. How did you know that would work? Belle asked, wonder in her voice. Because you're her mother. You know what she needs even when you think you don't. We stayed on the phone for another hour, mostly in comfortable silence, punctuated by Amelie's occasional sounds and Belle's gentle responses. I listened to the rhythm of her life, the soft footsteps, the creak of the rocking chair, the quiet sounds of someone learning to be everything to someone else. The deal's falling apart, I told her finally, when Amelie had been quiet for several minutes. Yamamoto wants to restructure the entire partnership model. We might be looking at another few days of negotiations. Another few days? Belle's voice carried an edge I recognized. Dante, it's been 8 days already. I know. I'm trying to find a way to cut this short. Are you? Because from here, it sounds like you're doing exactly what you've always done. Prioritizing business over everything else. The words hit harder than they should have because they contained enough truth to be dangerous. That's not fair, Belle, isn't it? You said 10 to 12 days maximum. It's been 8 days, and now you're talking about extending further. The deal is worth $40 million. And Amelie is worth what exactly? What's your daughter worth on your balance sheet, Dante? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Through the phone, I could hear Amelie starting to fuss again, as if she could. Sense the tension, even through her mother's attempt to keep her voice level. I'm coming home. No, you're not. You're going to stay and close your deal because that's who you are. That's who you've always been. Belle, listen to me. I have to go. Amelie needs me. She hung up before I could respond. I immediately tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text, then another, nothing. I stood in the hallway of the Tokyo hotel for a long time, looking at my phone, thinking about priorities and obligations, and the weight of other people's expectations versus the pull of something I was only beginning to understand. Then I went back to my room, opened my laptop, and sent an email to Robert. I'm coming home. Send the full team to finish negotiations. The deal either closes without me, or it doesn't. His response came within minutes. You can't be serious. We're this close. They need you specifically. Then they'll have to adjust their expectations. My family needs me more. The next morning, I told Yamamoto's team that I had to return home for a family emergency. That my head of operations would be arriving within 24 hours to continue negotiations. That I trusted my team to close the deal on terms we'd already discussed. They were not happy. There were thinly veiled implications that this demonstrated exactly the kind of unreliability they'd been concerned about. That American business culture didn't understand the importance of personal commitment to partnerships. I apologized, bowed, expressed my deepest regrets, and booked a flight home that left in 6 hours. The flight from Tokyo to San Francisco to New Orleans took 19 hours. 19 hours to think about what I'd just done. The deal I might have destroyed. The professional reputation I'd potentially damaged. The message I'd sent to my board and investors about where my priorities lay. But every time doubt crept in, I'd pull up the photo I'd taken of Amelie on my phone. Those serious dark eyes looking at the camera with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so small. And I'd know I'd made the right choice. I arrived at Belle's door at 6:23 a.m., with 3 days of stubble, wrinkled clothes, and eyes that carried. The exhaustion of someone who'd spent 19 hours on airplanes thinking about everything he'd almost lost. Belle opened the door on the second knock, She was wearing her robe, Amelie against her shoulder, both of them backlit by the soft morning light filtering through the apartment windows. For a moment, she just stared at me like I was a ghost. "You're here." "I'm here. What about Tokyo? The deal?" I sent Robert to finish negotiations. "Dante, that deal is worth $40 million. I know." She stepped aside, and I walked into the apartment that smelled like coffee and baby powder and home. Amelie was making soft sounds, those little grunts that meant she was waking up from a nap. "Why?" Belle asked quietly. "Why did you come back?" "Because you were right." I took off my jacket, dropping it on the chair. I was doing exactly what I've always done, putting business first, convincing myself it was necessary, that it mattered, that the world would stop turning if I wasn't there to manage every detail. And now I realize the world kept turning just fine without me for 38 years before I was born. It'll manage a few more decades after I'm gone, but Amelie only gets one childhood, and I've already missed too much of it. Belle's eyes filled with tears. "Robert called," she said. "The deal closed. Apparently your team negotiated better terms than originally proposed." I felt a flicker of professional pride, quickly followed by the realization that the news didn't create the surge of satisfaction I would have expected. A month ago, closing that deal would have been the highlight of my year. Now it felt like something that had happened to someone else. Good for them, $43 million, plus subsidiary agreements worth another 15. "Belle, I don't care. I know." She crossed the room to stand in front of me. "That's what scares me." "What do you mean?" She handed me Amelie, who immediately settled against my chest like she'd been waiting for me to come home. "What happens when the novelty wears off? When being a father becomes routine instead of miraculous? When you miss the next big opportunity because you chose to stay home with us? Then I miss it. And you won't resent us?" I looked down at Amelie, who was looking up at me with those serious dark eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations. "Can I tell you something? The whole time I was in Tokyo, closing that deal, proving I was indispensable to the company, I felt empty, like I was going through the motions of a life that didn't fit anymore." Belle was quiet, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "But this..." I adjusted Amelie slightly. "Being here with you and her, learning how to be a family. This feels like the life I'm supposed to be living. Even when she cries for 3 hours straight. Especially then, because even her crying is ours. Even the exhaustion and the fear and the moments when I have no idea what I'm doing. All of it matters, in a way that profit margins and market share never have." Belle sat down heavily on the couch, like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. "I want to believe you. Then believe me. It's not that simple, Dante. Trust isn't something you can just decide to have again. Then let me earn it back, however long it takes." Amelie made a soft sound, and Belle smiled despite the tears still sliding down her cheeks. "She missed you. She's been fussy since you left." "I missed her too. Both of you." We fell into an easy silence, the kind that used to exist between us before our marriage started fracturing, under the weight of competing ambitions and unspoken resentments. I watched Belle move around the apartment, tidying up the evidence of the days I'd been gone. Formula bottles in the sink, burp cloths draped over every surface. The organized chaos of new motherhood. Margaret stayed for 3 days. Belle said, sitting back down. She was wonderful. Taught me techniques I never would have figured out on my own. But I'm glad she's gone. Why? Because I needed to prove to myself that I could do this, that I wasn't going to fall apart the moment things got hard. You're one of the strongest people I've ever known, Belle. You never needed to prove that. Maybe not to you, but I needed to prove it to myself. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new rhythm. I restructured my work schedule completely, delegating responsibilities I'd always insisted on handling personally. I promoted 3 sous chefs to head chef positions at different restaurants, giving them autonomy I'd never been comfortable relinquishing before. I turned down expansion opportunities in Dubai and London. I stopped answering emails after 6 p.m., and I showed up every morning at Belle's apartment. Every feeding I could make, every diaper change, every bath time. every moment of Amelie's rapidly developing personality. The professional world reacted with a mixture of shock and pity. Articles appeared in industry publications questioning whether I'd lost my edge. Investors pulled out of projects they deemed too risky without my full attention. 2 board members resigned, citing concerns about my commitment to the company's growth trajectory. I didn't care, or rather, I cared less than I cared about being there when Amelie smiled for the first time at 6 weeks old. A real smile, not gas, that lit up her entire face and made my heart feel too big for my chest. "Belle," I called out, and she came running from the kitchen, convinced something was wrong. She smiled. I was holding Amelie up, grinning like an idiot. She actually smiled at me. "She's been doing that for a few days now," Belle said, but she was smiling too. "But that was a really good one. Did you get a picture?" "About 30. We spent the rest of the afternoon trying to get Amelie to smile again, making ridiculous faces and silly sounds. When she finally gave us another one, we both cheered so loudly we startled her into crying. "This is what I would have missed," I said later, after Amelie had calmed down and was sleeping in my arms. "If I'd stayed in Tokyo, if I'd kept prioritizing work, all of this." Belle was quiet for a moment, studying my face with her photographer's eye for detail. "You're different," she said finally, "not just with Amelie, with everything. You're more, I don't know, present. I'm trying to be. It shows." 2 months after I'd first discovered Amelie's existence, Belle's apartment had become more mine than my French Quarter penthouse. My clothes took up half her closet. My toothbrush sat next to hers in the bathroom. I'd stopped going home most nights, crashing on her couch after late feeding so I could be there for the early morning routine. Marguerite noticed during her second visit. "So, you two are back together?" she asked, watching me heat a bottle while Belle showered. "It's complicated. That seems to be everyone's favorite answer lately. I'm not trying to be evasive. We genuinely haven't defined what this is. We're co-parenting. We're friends. I paused, trying to find the right words. "We're figuring it out. Do you love her?" The question caught me off guard. I never stopped loving her. Does she know that? I don't know. Maybe. We haven't talked about it. Why not? Because I'm terrified. I admitted. I'm terrified of pushing too hard and scaring her away, of assuming we can just pick up where we left off, of not respecting the fact that she spent months learning to live without me. Marguerite was quiet, testing the bottle temperature with the same precision Belle used. "You hurt her badly, you know. When you asked for the divorce." "I know. I don't think you do." She called me that night. Cried for 3 hours. Said she felt like she'd failed at the one thing she'd wanted most, building a family with someone who actually wanted to be there. The words hit like a physical blow. I never said I didn't want to be there. You didn't have to say it. Marguerite handed me the bottle. "You showed it every time you chose a business trip over date night. Every time you missed dinner because of a meeting that ran long. Every time you looked at your phone instead of listening to her talk about her day." I started to defend myself, then stopped, because she was right. I had done all of those things. I had taken Belle for granted, assumed she'd always be there waiting. When my career finally slowed down enough for me to pay attention, how do I fix it? You can't fix the past, but you can choose differently now, and keep choosing differently, even when it's hard, even when work is demanding and opportunities are calling, and every instinct tells you to prioritize your career. Amelie started fussing from her bassinet, and I went to her automatically. The motion had become second nature. Lift, support the head, settle her against my chest, begin the gentle bounce that she liked. "You're good with her," Marguerite observed. "Better than I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, that you'd show up for a week, realize parenting is harder than running a restaurant empire, and disappear back to your old life." "And now?" "Now I think maybe you're actually trying, which scares Belle more than if you just left." "Why would trying scare her?" "Because it gives her hope. And hope is dangerous when you've already had your heart broken once." That night, after Marguerite had gone to bed in Belle's guest room, and Amelie was asleep in her bassinet, Belle and I sat on her back porch. The November air had turned crisp, promising the mild winter that passed for cold in New Orleans. Cicadas sang their late-season song, and somewhere down the street, someone was playing jazz on a saxophone. "There's something I need to tell you," Belle said quietly, "about why I really didn't tell you about the pregnancy." I waited, giving her space to find the words. "It wasn't just because you said children didn't fit your schedule. It was because of what happened after, the night you asked for the divorce." I remembered that night in fragmented pieces. The way she'd read through the papers with that careful composure that made me feel like a monster. The sound of her pen signing her name. The terrible silence that had filled our apartment after she'd closed the folder. "Do you remember what you said?" Belle asked. "About children?" I shook my head, afraid of what was coming. "You said you'd dodged a bullet, that at least we hadn't made the mistake of having children together before we figured out we weren't compatible." The memory hit me like a freight train. I had said that, standing in our kitchen, watching her pack her cameras, trying to convince myself I was making the right choice, trying to convince her that ending our marriage was best for both of us. "Belle, I was already pregnant when you said that." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. "About 4 weeks along, though I didn't know it yet. I found out 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized. But when I did find out, all I could hear was your voice saying you couldn't imagine anything worse than being tied to me because of a child." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of words that couldn't be taken back and wounds that couldn't be easily healed. "So you decided not to tell me." I decided to protect Amelie from being seen as a mistake, from having a father who felt trapped by her existence. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring out at the dark garden. "I know it wasn't fair to you. I know I took away your choice, but I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at her the way you looked at me that night. Like we were obstacles to your real life. You were never an obstacle, wasn't I? We wanted different things, Dante. You wanted an empire. I wanted a partner. You wanted to build restaurants across the world. I wanted to build a home. Those aren't compatible dreams. They could have been, if I'd been willing to compromise." Belle turned to look at me, and in the dim porch light, I could see the tears she was trying not to let fall. "I wrote you letters. When I was pregnant, dozens of them, telling you about the ultrasounds, the first time I felt her move, the moment they told me she was a girl. I'd write them at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, and then I'd delete them before I could hit send. Why? Because I was terrified. Terrified you'd feel obligated. Terrified you'd resent us. Terrified you'd do the right thing and hate me for it. I would have changed. If you'd told me, I would have figured it out. Would you? Or would you have stepped up out of duty while viewing fatherhood as another responsibility to manage?" It was the same question Marguerite had asked, and I still didn't have a good answer. The man I'd been 8 months ago probably would have done exactly that, provided financially, shown up for the big moments, but continued to prioritize his career while convincing himself he was being a good father. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'd like to think I would have risen to the occasion. But honestly, you're probably right. I probably would have seen Amelie as a complication to solve, rather than a person to love." And now, I looked through the porch door to where I could just see Amelie's bassinet in the living room. Now I can't imagine my life without her, without either of you. Belle was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared, Dante." "Of what?" "Of believing this is real. Of trusting that you won't change your mind when things get hard. Of letting myself hope that maybe we could try again." The words hung in the air between us, fragile and terrifying and full of possibility. "I'm scared too," I admitted, scared of failing again, of letting you down, of not being the man Amelie needs me to be. "What do? We try, anyway. We choose each other, every day. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Belle looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the war playing out. Fear versus hope. Self-protection versus vulnerability. The safety of keeping walls up versus the risk of tearing them down. "Ask me again in 3 months. "What? You said you wanted to marry me again. Ask me again in 3 months. When you've had time to realize what you're really signing up for. When the novelty has worn off, and parenting is just Life, not an adventure. I'll ask you every day for 3 months, if that's what it takes. She smiled then, real and warm and cautiously hopeful. We'll see. The next morning, I started my campaign. While Belle was making coffee, I got down on one knee with Amelie in my arms. Marry me? Belle laughed, nearly spilling her coffee. Day 1. 90 days to go. You're ridiculous. I'm determined. Day 15, I asked while changing Amelie's diaper at 2 in the morning. Be my wife again? Ask me in 75 days. Day 30, I asked while she was studying for her medical board recertification, exhausted and stressed and covered in spit up. Choose me? Belle looked up from her notes, and despite the exhaustion, she smiled. 60 days. Day 45? I asked while we were grocery shopping, Amelie strapped to my chest in a carrier, Belle pushing the cart. Build a life with me? An elderly woman in the produce section overheard and gasped. Say yes, dear. He's clearly crazy about you. Belle just shook her head, but she was grinning. 45 days. I started varying my proposals. Some were romantic, fresh flowers and carefully prepared dinners. Some were ridiculous, written in Amelie's alphabet blocks or spelled out in formula scoops. Some were quiet, whispered while Amelie slept between us during afternoon naps. But every single day, I asked. And every single day, Belle smiled and told me how many days remained. On day 60, something shifted. We were sitting on her back porch, watching Amelie discover her toes for the first time. The pure wonder on her face as she grabbed her feet and pulled them to her mouth made us both laugh. Grow old with me? I asked, continuing my daily tradition. But this time, Belle didn't immediately count down the remaining days. She was quiet for a long moment, watching our daughter explore her newest discovery. Do you remember our wedding? Every detail. You wore your grandmother's lace. Your sister cried through the entire ceremony. It rained, and you said it was good luck. I was so sure that day. Belle's voice was soft with memory, so certain that we were going to build this perfect life together. That love would be enough. It wasn't, though. Was it? No. She turned to look at me. Love wasn't enough because I wanted all of you, and you could only give me the parts that didn't interfere with your career. I failed you. We failed each other. I should have been honest about what I needed, instead of hoping you'd figure it out. You should have been willing to compromise instead of assuming I'd always be there waiting. Amelie had lost interest in her toes and was now studying the ceiling fan with serious concentration. If we do this again, Belle said carefully, if we try to build something new, it has to be different. More honesty, even when it's hard. More presence, even when work is demanding. More us. I want that. All of it. Even if it means turning down opportunities, missing out on deals, accepting that your career trajectory might not look like what you always planned. Especially then, because I spent 15 years chasing a vision of success that left me empty. And I don't want to waste another 15 years before I figure out that this, you and Amelie and family dinners and bedtime stories, this is what actually matters. 30 days, Belle said, but her voice was warmer than it had been. 30 days, and then we'll talk. Really talk about what trying again would look like. Those last 30 days passed in a blur of ordinary moments that became extraordinary because we were building them together. Amelie's first laugh, triggered by Dante making ridiculous faces during tummy time. Belle's first full night of sleep since Amelie was born, made possible by Dante handling all the night feedings. Their first family outing to the park, where Amelie spent 20 minutes being fascinated by leaves. On day 89, Belle returned to work for the first time. 3 shifts a week in Tulane's trauma unit, easing back into the career she'd paused for motherhood. I took those days with Amelie, learning firsthand what Belle had been managing alone for months. The first day was humbling. Amelie seemed to sense her mother was gone and was fussy from the moment Belle left. I tried everything. Bottles, diapers, walking, bouncing, white noise, singing. Nothing worked for more than 10 minutes. By noon, I was exhausted. By 3 p.m., I was questioning every life choice that had led to this moment. By 6 p.m., when Belle was supposed to be home but called to say her trauma case was running long, I was sitting on the floor with a crying baby, covered in spit-up, wondering how Belle had done this alone for weeks. Belle finally walked through the door at 11 p.m., looking exhausted, but energized in a way I hadn't seen since before our divorce. The operating room was where she came alive, where her gifts for precision and quick thinking saved lives. "I'm so sorry." She dropped her bag and immediately reached for Amelie, who had finally fallen asleep against my chest. The patient was critical, and I couldn't leave until we stabilized her. "It's okay. Save lives. We handled it." She looked around at the evidence of our day. Formula bottles everywhere, laundry that hadn't been folded, dishes in the sink, takeout containers from the dinner I'd barely had time to eat. Handled it. Might be generous. We survived it. Isn't that the metric for parenting success? Belle laughed, the sound filling the apartment with warmth. "How was she?" "Fussy. She missed you." "How were you?" "Terrified. Exhausted. Completely out of my depth." I looked at Amelie sleeping peacefully now that her mother was home, and absolutely sure that this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Belle sat beside me on the couch, close enough that I could smell the antiseptic from the hospital mixed with her lavender shampoo. "Day 90 is tomorrow." "I know. Are you going to ask? I haven't missed a day yet." "I'm not starting now." She was quiet for a moment, and when I turned to look at her, there were tears in her eyes. "Ask me now." "What?" "I know you plan to wait until tomorrow to make it exactly 90 days. But ask me now." I shifted carefully, trying not to wake Amelie, and turned to face Belle fully. "Carolina Isabelle Laurent Hayes, will you marry me? Not because we have a daughter, though she's the best thing we ever created. Not because it's the right thing or the expected thing, but because I choose you. Every day. In every way. Because I want to build a life with you. A real one. Where we're partners in everything. Where I show up, not just physically, but emotionally. Where we choose each other, even when it's hard." I didn't have a ring. Hadn't planned this moment, but I had my whole heart, and I offered it to her with shaking hands. "I choose you too." Belle's voice was soft, but steady. "I choose late nights with a crying baby over quiet nights alone. I choose arguing about whose turn it is to do laundry over the silence of living separate lives. I choose trusting you again over protecting myself from being hurt." She reached out and took my hand. "Yes, Dante, I'll marry you. Again. For real this time." Amelie chose that moment to wake up, making soft sounds of protest at being jostled. But when she saw both her parents smiling down at her, tears streaming down their faces, she gave us one of her biggest smiles. "I think she approves," I said. "Smart kid. She knows a good deal when she sees one." We sat there on Belle's couch, the three of us, while New Orleans hummed with life outside the windows. And for the first time since the divorce, since the discovery, since all the fear and anger, and complicated navigation of building something new from broken pieces, I felt peace. This was home, not the penthouse overlooking the river, not the restaurants with my name in gold letters. This, Belle beside me, Amelie in my arms, the ordinary, extraordinary miracle of being chosen and choosing in return. 3 months later, we got married in Belle's grandmother's garden in Lafayette. The ceremony was nothing like our first wedding. No 100-person guest list or designer dress or 5-tier cake. Just 30 people who mattered, standing under the oak trees draped with Spanish moss, while a local minister married us for the second time. Amelie, now 7 months old, served as flower girl. Marguerite carried her down the makeshift aisle, and Amelie scattered petals with baby enthusiasm, which mostly meant flinging them randomly and laughing at the way they fell. Belle wore a simple cream dress, not white, acknowledging the journey we'd been on. I wore a linen suit because Louisiana in March was already warm. And when we exchanged vows, we didn't use traditional words. We wrote our own. "I promise," I said, my voice rough with emotion, "to choose presence over profit, to measure success in bedtime stories, not bank statements, to ask for your hand every morning, even though you've already said yes, to be the man our daughter believes I am, to love you in the chaos, not despite it." Belle's vows made me cry. "I promise to trust, even when fear whispers lies, to let you fail and grow and try again, to choose partnership over protection, to believe in the man you're becoming, to love you through the ordinary moments that become our extraordinary life. When the minister pronounced you as husband and wife again, the small gathering erupted in applause. Amelie contributed by clapping her hands together, not understanding why, but knowing it was a happy moment. "This time it's forever," I whispered against Belle's lips. "This time," she whispered back, "we know what we're choosing." The reception was held in her grandmother's house, with catered Creole food and a small jazz band. My mother held Amelie and cried happy tears. Marguerite gave a toast about second chances and stubborn people who refuse to give up on each other, and Belle's grandmother pulled me aside to tell me I'd better not mess this up again. "I won't," I promised. "I'm all in this time. You better be. That girl loved you enough to give you another chance. Don't waste it." "I don't plan to." 2 years later, life looked nothing like I'd once imagined it would, and everything like I'd never known I wanted. We'd bought a house in the Garden District, not a showpiece, but a home with a backyard where Amelie could play, and enough room for the family we were building. Belle had returned to work full-time at the hospital, splitting her schedule so she was home most evenings. I'd sold off most of my restaurant empire, keeping only 3 locations, all in New Orleans, all small and intimate, focused on training young chefs rather than expanding into new markets. The flagship had been reimagined. Instead of seating 200, we now seated 40. Reservations were booked 6 months out, but I was home by 9 p.m. every night. Sundays, we were closed. Family day, non-negotiable. The industry had been shocked at first. Articles questioned whether I'd lost my competitive edge, whether becoming a father had somehow diminished my drive. Some saw it as failure, walking away from opportunities, playing small when I could have gone big. I saw it differently. I'd spent 15 years building an empire I could be proud of. Now I was building a legacy that mattered. The afternoon sun painted their backyard in shades of gold. Amelie, now 2.5, was chasing bubbles that I blew from the porch steps. Her laughter, pure and joyful, echoed through the garden and made the neighbors smile. "Daddy, more bubbles," she demanded, her vocabulary expanding daily in ways that continued to amaze us both. Magic word, "Please. More bubbles, please. Much better, baby girl." Belle stood at the kitchen window, watching us through the glass, her camera in hand. She'd returned to photography part-time, specializing in family portraits, capturing real moments instead of posed perfection. I caught her eye and waved. She waved back, then lifted her camera and took a photo. The shutter click barely audible over Amelie's delighted squeals. "Mama, look." Amelie had discovered she could catch bubbles on her shirt without popping them. She was now wearing several iridescent spheres like temporary jewelry. "I'm magic." "You are, baby." Belle called through the open window. "Very magical. Like Daddy. Just like Daddy." Belle agreed, catching my eye over Amelie's head. After lunch, after Amelie had gone down for her nap, Belle found me in the kitchen cleaning up. She moved behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and resting her head against my back. "I have news." I turned in her arms, reading her expression, the nervous excitement barely contained. "Good news, or potentially terrifying news. Depends on your perspective." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a familiar white stick. 2 pink lines. My eyes went wide, and my gaze moved from the test to her face. "How far along?" 10 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you. I pulled her close, feeling like my heart might burst. "Another one? If you're ready." "Are you kidding?" I don't even have words. Amelie's going to be a big sister. She'll be amazing at it. Probably bossy, but amazing. Belle laughed against my chest. "She gets that from you. She gets everything good from you." We stood in our kitchen, wrapped around each other, while our daughter slept upstairs and afternoon light painted patterns on the floor. And I thought about the man I'd been 2 years ago, the one who'd measured success in Michelin stars and profit margins, the one who'd been so focused on building an empire that he'd nearly missed building a life. That man was gone. In his place was someone I liked better, someone who knew that the best thing he'd ever create wasn't on a menu. Someone who understood that real success was measured in moments like this. In his wife's arms, with their daughter sleeping upstairs and another baby on the way. Do you ever regret it? Belle asked quietly. The life you gave up? The empire you could have built? I thought about the Beaumont offer I'd turned down. The restaurants I'd never open. The recognition I'd never chase. Sometimes I wonder what might have been, I admitted. But then Amelie laughs. Or you smile at me over morning coffee. Or I watch you in the operating room saving someone's life. And I remember I didn't give up a life. I chose one. Belle pulled back to look at me. I love our life. Me too. I placed my hand over her still flat stomach, where our second child was growing. All of it. All of us. That evening, we told Amelie she was going to be a big sister. We'd worried she might not understand, but she surprised us by immediately placing her hand on Belle's stomach and announcing that she would teach the baby everything she knew. Like what? I asked, trying not to laugh. How to blow bubbles, and sing songs, and eat mac and cheese, and love Mama and Daddy. Those are very important lessons. I'm a good teacher. After Amelie was asleep, Belle and I sat on our back porch, the same spot where we'd had so many important conversations over the past 2 years, where we'd learned to trust again, where we'd rebuilt what had been broken into something stronger than before. What do you think it'll be? Belle asked, her hand resting on her stomach. Boy or girl? Doesn't matter, as long as they're healthy. That's a cop-out answer. Fine, I think it's a boy. Someone to balance out all the feminine energy in this house. Amelie's not that feminine. She's a tomboy. She insists on wearing her princess dress to the grocery store. Fair point. A shooting star streaked across the Louisiana sky. Belle made a wish she didn't share aloud, but I had a feeling I knew what it was. The same thing I'd wish for. That this moment, this peace, this hard-won happiness would last. That we'd keep choosing each other through all the challenges ahead. That our children would grow up knowing they were chosen, wanted, loved beyond measure. Inside, Amelie's voice drifted through the baby monitor, sleep talking about bubbles and magic and Daddy. She's dreaming about you, Belle said, smiling. Best dreams ever. You're a good father, Dante. Better than I expected. Better than you probably expected. I'm trying. It shows. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of New Orleans. Jazz drifting from a neighbor's open window, cicadas singing their summer song, the distant sound of a steamboat on the Mississippi. Here's what I learned, I said finally, that night when I stormed through your door, so angry about what you'd hidden from me. I thought I was there to demand answers, to assert my rights, to make you acknowledge what you'd done wrong. And instead, I discovered that sometimes the thing you think you lost was actually holding you back from who you're meant to be. That sometimes the choice that looks like sacrifice is actually the path to everything you didn't know you needed. I looked at Belle, beautiful in the porch light, her hand protective over our growing child. And sometimes love doesn't get a second chance. But when it does, you grab it with both hands and don't let go. Belle leaned her head on my shoulder. That's very poetic for a chef. I'm a man of many talents. Yes, you are. We stayed there until the mosquitoes drove us inside, talking about names for the baby, and plans for expanding the house and whether Amelie was ready for a toddler bed. The ordinary conversations that made up a life, the beautiful mundane details of building something together. Later, lying in bed with Belle curled against me, I thought about the question she'd asked, whether I regretted the empire I'd given up, the opportunities I'd turned down, the version of success I'd spent 15 years chasing. The answer was simple. I'd traded an empire for a kingdom, profit for presence, recognition for relationship, and I'd gotten the better end of the deal by far. Some things are worth more than all the Michelin stars in the world. Love, being there for the moments that matter, choosing the people you cherish over the achievements you accumulate. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, through divorce and discovery, and the humbling process of learning to be a father. Through Belle's courage in giving me a second chance I probably didn't deserve. Through Amelie's existence, proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the choices we didn't make. But I'd learned it. and I'd never forget it again. In the nursery down the hall, Amelie slept peacefully, dreaming her toddler dreams, safe and loved and certain of her place in the world. And in the kitchen, on the refrigerator, was the ultrasound photo from Belle's first appointment. Another life beginning, another chance to get it right from the start. This was my empire now. Not restaurants across 4 continents, not gold letters and critical acclaim, but this, Belle breathing softly beside me, Amelie safe in her room, a baby growing in Belle's womb, a house full of love and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family. I'd spent 15 years building the wrong thing, but I'd gotten there eventually, and I'd spend the rest of my life grateful for the wake-up call that came in the form of a tiny baby in her mother's arms. The moment that changed everything. The night I discovered that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually need. So if you're out there listening to this story, wondering what success really looks like, let me tell you, it's not in the accolades or the achievements. It's not in the corner office or the 7-figure salary. Success is being there when your daughter takes her first steps. It's holding your wife's hand through pregnancy scares and late-night feedings. It's choosing presence over profit every single time. Because here's the truth they don't teach you in business school. You can build the biggest empire in the world. You can earn every award and break every record. But if you're building it alone, if you're sacrificing the people you love on the altar of achievement, you haven't succeeded. You've just traded your life for something that will never love you back. I almost made that trade. I came so close to missing everything that mattered. But Belle gave me a second chance. Amelie gave me a reason to change. And I grabbed that chance with both hands and held on tight. Now drop a comment and tell me. What would you choose? The empire or the kingdom? The achievement or the relationship? The recognition or the real life happening while you're chasing dreams that won't matter in the end? I want to hear your thoughts, your stories, your struggles with this same question. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about your own choices and priorities, hit that subscribe button. Because Dr. Phillips has more stories that will make you laugh and cry and rethink what success really means. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose differently. To put family first. To build a life instead of just a career. Give it a like if you believe that real success is measured in love, not money. In moments, not milestones. In the people who will remember you long after your achievements are forgotten. Some deals are worth more than any empire. Some recipes are worth more than all the Michelin stars in the world. And some second chances are worth fighting for with everything you have. This is Dr. Phillips reminding you to choose presence. Choose love. Choose the life that'll matter when everything else fades away. Because that angry millionaire CEO who stormed into his ex-wife's house learned something that night. Something that changed his life forever. The moment you see your child for the first time, everything you thought you knew about success becomes irrelevant. And the only question that matters is this. Will you be there? Really there? Not just physically present, but emotionally invested. Not just providing, but participating. Not just existing in their lives, but being the center of their world the way they are the center of yours. I chose to be there every day since that rainy October night, and it's the best decision I've ever made. Better than any business deal, better than any award, better than anything I could have built alone, because what I'm building now, with Belle and Amelie and the baby on the way, that's the real legacy. That's what will last long after the restaurants close and the reviews fade and the empire crumbles. Love, family, presence. That's the empire worth building. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life building it right. Thank you for listening. Until next time, choose well.